I can't, like, my interest in what this workshop is about, the sort of connection between writing and walking. Um, I mean, I'm ambulatory, so that's good. Congratulations, me. But also, like, when I moved to Chicago in 2004 to go to graduate school, Columbia College, for writing, for creative writing. I took a train everywhere, like most people who live in the city. Like it's a lot of walking, it's a lot of public transit, it's a lot of then taxis. Um, no ride sharing in 2004. It's not the way that we think about it anyway. And I took a class from a guy named Tony Trigilio that I would recommend to anybody. He writes mostly poetry, but super fantastic guy, very sweet. Also a practicing Buddhist, and he offered a class called Meditations and Poetics, and very popular class, very popular. I think he offers it now on a regular basis. I'm not 100% sure, but we were the guinea pigs. So the program was very new, and I know I was in the first class that was ever able to take this class. And what we did was we looked at a bunch of different kinds of meditation. We would meditate in class. We read all kinds of texts. I mean, it's a graduate level class, so we did like a kind of unbelievable amount of reading, both of like poetry and stuff like that, but also kind of more like meditative texts. We read a book. I can't remember the title of it now. The subtitle is Zen and the Art of Creativity by John Dido Laurie. So 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Really, really good book. Really super interesting book. And so we did like all these different kinds of meditative practices, and not in like a Buddhist sort of way or like an overtly sort of spiritual kind of way. Just in terms of like looking at that question, like how can meditation be of service to the creative mind and to our creative work? And so we did a lot of different things. And the thing that probably stuck with me most and was most instantly resonant and sort of, I guess, generative, for lack of a better word, was walking meditations. Because I walked all the time. I had my car in the city, but I almost never drove it if I didn't have to. I walked everywhere. And so I was interested in how I could sort of make use of that time, or and I don't mean make use in terms of like productivity, but how I could maybe take that time that's on the train and, people have a lot of opinions about taking public transit, but I kind of enjoyed it. It's like one of the things I miss most about Chicago. But yeah, sometimes, I mean, you meet an interesting array of humanity, and trains are like a varying level of clean or sanitary or anything like that. Hopefully they're better now, but I wonder. Um, but like how to like use that time. Like people try to read on the train, and like the common thing that you always hear is like, oh, it's hard. I can't concentrate. Right? There's too much going on. Too many people. Can't concentrate. So I was interested in like how can I like use this practice to kind of sort of train my mind to be able to read and write in like densely populated places while I'm moving around, while there's like a bunch of other conversations going and things like that. And it was really, really effective. It got to a point where like, anytime, I could just sitting or standing, if I was standing, I would usually read because it was just too hard to have something that you might drop, drop things on the floor of the train. It's one of the things you learn when you live in the city with the subway is you don't drop things on the floor of the subway, because it's not good. So standing up, I would read. Sitting down, I would try to write, and I would try to do this all the time. And then I would go on walks throughout the city. Like when I first moved to the city, the first thing I did was just kind of walked around and got lost a little bit, semi-lost. It's hard to get lost, I think, in Chicago. It's a grid system. It's not that hard to figure out. Also, the streets are numbered, so you can figure it out pretty easy if you can count. Also, and this is the time before Google Maps and things like that. So I just kind of went and like would take trains and would go on walks in different neighborhoods and go check out different architectural landmarks and things that people I knew who lived there thought were cool. And as I was doing this, I would always have a notebook very similar to the ones you all have. And I would try to just capture notes, anything that would come to mind, or I would sort of like do some writing in my head and kind of like repeat lines or phrases until I could get to a place where I could sort of like capture things. And it worked really well. But like the side effect of it, because I had never really I was raised in a house that was religious, but I had never really done any kind of like meditating. I'd never done yoga. I'd never done any kind of like meditative practices in like a specific intentional sort of way prior to this. And I found out pretty quickly that also like it just helped me sort of like calm down and focus. I mean, I lived a pretty fast-paced life when I was in Chicago. I played in bands. I was always kind of coming and going, and like not home much and going from here to there and seeing a lot of people. I was a lot more social than I am now. But I found that doing that not only helped me write and concentrate and focus a little better in those kind of scenarios, but it also just sort of like helped calm me down, helped me focus a little bit, helped kind of focus my attention and kind of zero in. And that was more interesting just than the like kind of selfish, like I just want to be able to read and write on the train sort of thing. And so I've carried it with me, and it's continued to be a very useful practice and something that I do all the time. Not as much as I would like to be honest, but we do what we can with work and all our responsibilities and everything like that. So I've got some text, and I can send you a link that can be sent, or people that you can send around to people. I don't have copies of everything. I didn't know how many copies to bring, and it's kind of a lot. But like my interest, like, and the thing that also became apparent was like I could sort of modulate my attention, and I'm interested to hear from you walkers or people who walk on a regular basis. Um, like how it could be of service both to the interior and the exterior, right? And the interior is sort of like that sort of like mental focus and kind of calming the mind and doing all the things that we sort of expect, or that a lot of people talk about with like mindfulness and meditation and things like that. The centering of the mind, the calming of the breath, focusing on the moment, that sort of things. Those things were really useful. But also those things were useful for me sort of collecting language and images and things like that from the exterior, of which in Chicago, lots of people, lots of architecture, lots of cool things happening all the time, and cool things to see, lots of things that I want to capture in my writing. So how can I like kind of do this inside outside thing and kind of center the brain a little bit, center the focus, and to better serve more awareness of the world and sort of participating in it rather than just kind of like going from place to place, being more concerned with the destination, being more concerned that I got to be at work in 15 minutes or something like that, rather than kind of appreciating the beauty that is around. And if you're thinking like Chicago is a big urban area, I don't think it is beautiful at all. That's totally fair. That is fine. I find it incredibly strikingly beautiful. I think Grant Park is incredibly strikingly beautiful. I'll take the lakefront with any beach I've ever been to in this country, and I've been to many of them. And there's a lot more green space in Chicago than I think people realize, but I don't know that you even necessarily need green space. I find the urban environment to be equally stimulating for obviously a lot of different reasons. Um, so I've kind of continued this practice, and like I still, I go for walks to sort of do the interior thing and the calming of the mind and that sort of stuff. But also I go for walks, if I'm feeling sort of like tapped out or zapped, or like I don't have, if the writing is not coming, if the language isn't there, the place where I go is usually external stimuli, which only works if you are attentive to it. And so the attention that I've learned from doing this has been really useful in those ways. And so some of the text that I have and some of the stuff that I want to talk about a little bit are sort of, some of it is like science, the scientific evidence, the science behind like why this works, why this is beneficial, why so many people do it. And I think understand that there are benefits to it, but maybe don't understand exactly how many benefits to it and like just how good it is for you, mind, body, and spirit. Um, but also, being able to use that to just be more of an active participant in the world in which you're moving through, because it's easy not to be an active participant in that world. And I would say a lot of our daily lives and habits and things like that encourage us not to be, right? They encourage us to focus on work, or to focus on the task, or to focus on the next place that we need to be. And like, what do they say? It's not the destination, it's the journey.
How you get there, yeah.
Right? That cliche. Well, like a lot of writers don't like cliches. I don't understand why that is, because cliches are great. They are like small little bits of figurative language that explain a complex idea in very simple, easy to understand language. And that, I think most writers don't like cliches because they're jealous they didn't come up with the cliches. I think that's what it is mostly. Because if you could come up with more of them, you would. There's a reason why. I don't want to say they're finite, but There's a reason we hear the same ones over and over again. It's because they illustrate difficult or complex concepts very simply, very easily, in a way that a child can hold in their mind. So we'll get to that stuff. We'll get to the text. And there's one text in particular that I first read in that class with Tony Trigilio that was like pretty striking. And I will share some of that with you. It's a very famous text that's widely available. Yeah, let's start with this one. Let's start with science because science is cool. So like thinking about like the inside stuff, like the mindfulness stuff, and like when I get to the text that I read in that meditations and poetics class, that I feel like kind of speaks to both. But thinking about like interior benefits, I mean, kind of like I would walk for health. It's good for you, right? We know all these things. We know the ways in which it's good for you, and that kind of stuff. But I found this was like kind of interesting, thinking about not just like walking, getting exercise, good cardiovascular, fresh air, good for the joints and all that kind of stuff. Like yes, yes, yes. I think we know that. I can't really speak to that. We're kind of here doing the kind of mind body connection thing, and I thought this was interesting. So this is from an article published in Science Daily out of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. The title is funny, and I'm not saying that this applies to any of you, so don't, this is just something that I found in doing research for this workshop. Attention couch potatoes, exclamation point. Walking boosts brain connectivity, function. Okay. And I'll just read a little bit of this because I thought this was pretty interesting. So a group of professional couch potatoes, quote unquote, as one researcher described them, has proven that even moderate exercise, in this case walking at one's own pace for 40 minutes 3 times a week, that sounds like you, Diana, can enhance the connectivity of important brain circuits, combat declines in brain function associated with aging, and increase performance on cognitive tasks. The study in Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience followed 65 adults ages 59 to 80 who joined a walking group or stretching and toning group for a year. All the participants were sedentary before the study, reporting less than 2 episodes of physical activity lasting 30 minutes or more in the previous 6 months. That seems like almost impossible. But whatever. I mean, that's all kinds of reasons for that. Who knows? And that's obviously not us, right? We all, that's as we've already demonstrated. So the researchers also measured brain activity in 32 younger, 18 to 35-year-old adults. I'm in none of these categories, so this has no bearing on me, I guess. I'm just kidding. Rather than focusing on specific brain structures, the study looked at activity in brain regions that function together as networks. Quote, almost nothing in the brain gets done by one area. It's more of a circuit, said University of Illinois psychology professor and Beckman Institute director Art Kramer, who led the study with kinesthesiology and community health professor Edward Macaulay and doctoral student Michelle Voss. Quote, these networks can become more or less connected. In general, as we get older, they become less connected, so we're interested in the effects of fitness on connectivity of the brain networks that show the most dysfunction with age. Neuroscientists have identified several distinct brain circuits. Perhaps the most intriguing is the default mode network, or DMN, which dominates brain activity when a person is least engaged with the outside world, either passively observing something or simply daydreaming. This is the part that really interests me because I feel like most of the time when we move through the world, even if we're like going on a walk or whatever, we're not in that state necessarily, but we're close. If we're talking with somebody, we're probably more concentrated on talking with them than we are maybe the world around us, and not getting hit by cars and things like, obviously the normal traffic. Seriously, like, there's a practical thing to walking. We live in a car country, you don't want to get hit. So like there's that, but that's almost like a survival mode kind of thing. Like as you're walking, most of the walking, if you're walking with someone, your attention is probably with them. I know when I'm with my partner, that's usually the case. But I think we spend a lot more time in this, default mode network status of our brain than we probably realize. And there's nothing wrong with that. Daydreaming is a wonderful thing. Fantastic things come to us when we daydream. I highly encourage such activity. But I feel like that's either passively observing something. That's the interesting part, and that's the part that stuck out to me in terms of how it relates to these other things that we're talking about. So To continue. Previous studies found that a loss of coordination in the DMN is a common symptom of aging and in extreme cases can be a marker of disease, Voss said. Quote, for example, people with Alzheimer's disease tend to have less activity in the default mode network and they tend to have less connectivity, or they have less activity in the default mode network and they tend to have less connectivity, excuse me, she said. Low connectivity means that different parts of the brain or different parts of the circuit are not operating in sync. Like poorly trained athletes on a rowing team, the brain regions that make up the circuit lack coordination and so do not function at at optimal efficiency or speed, Voss said. In healthy younger brain, activity in the DMN quickly diminishes when a person engages in an activity that requires focus on the external environment. Older people, people with Alzheimer's disease, and those who are schizophrenic have more difficulty down regulating the DMN so that other brain networks can come to the fore. A recent study by Kramer, Voss, and their colleagues found that older adults who are more fit tend to have better connectivity in specific regions of the DMN than their sedentary peers. Those with connectivity in the DMN also tend to be better at planning, prioritizing, strategizing, and multitasking. The new the new study used fMRI to determine whether aerobic activity increased connectivity in the DMN or other brain networks. Researchers measured participants' brain connectivity and performance on cognitive tasks at the beginning of the study, at 6 months, and a year after walking or toning and stretching. At the end of the year, DMN connectivity was significantly improved in the brains of older walkers, but not in the stretching and toning group, the researchers report. The walkers also had increased connectivity in parts of another brain circuit, the frontoexecutive network, which aids in the performance of complex tasks, and they did significantly better on cognitive tests than their toning and stretching peers. So, long story short, not only is it like good for brain health, but it builds brain health, right? It builds brain connectivity. And like this is a very, very amateur neuroscience is something that I'm very interested in because all that creativity, all the things that make us human are happening up there. And rather than just like my interest in this is not just solely like improving my memory or like maintaining my memory where it is, but just trying to get, these complex connections and associations. I want to be more aware of them. I want to be more aware. What's the phrasing again? I want to be more than passively observing something. Like my time for daydreaming is not usually when I'm walking, right? Like that's usually like sitting down somewhere. Like I might walk to a point where I would do some daydreaming in a park, kind of what you were talking about, Mike. Like when you're on the bike path, you find a good spot. Maybe you want to sit there and chill, or like you go to Vanderveer. Like both but they're not. They're usually distinct for me.
The running at county kind of want to keep doing it because that's what you want to do in a race to
right.
get the best time you could.
Sure.
Anytime I walked a little bit in a race, which to me is an absolute no-no, it kind of slowed down time and probably caused my chances of breaking this one record for myself. One thing I gotta say though is one phone came together at the end of the run. There's a relationship that blew up ages ago, and the realization came to the run.
Yeah.
Somehow it stirred realizations.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of what this is taught, like, or at least the potential for that, right?
Yeah.
That like this very simple physical activity, very basic physical activity, if we are able to do it. But what did they say? 40 minutes a day, 3 days a week was the walking group. That is not really all that much. For that kind of benefit, that's pretty, and beyond all the other, like we're not looking at any of the cardiovascular, all that good stuff. That's exactly totally separate from what we're talking about here. We're just kind of talking about brain connectivity and activity, and that being not only like strong but improved, right? And I think that's useful. So that's like one thing that, like, thinking about the inside stuff, that sort of came to mind that I thought was like kind of useful, and I was interested to see, because I think like we know a lot of the benefits of exercise, but we don't necessarily maybe think about it in those terms. Like today, I asked my students at St. Ambrose, just because I knew I was going to do this workshop tonight, I had them do a free write about what do they do if you're working on something or you're stressed out and you have a little bit of time or you need to step away, not like I'm out for the weekend or something, but like I have to come back to this task or this problem or whatever it is. What do you do to blow off steam? What do you do to relieve stress? And these are mostly incoming college freshmen, so 18, 19-year olds, a couple exceptions, but most of them around there. The vast majority of them was something physical, whether it was going for a walk, getting some exercise, playing a musical instrument, which you may not think is physical, but trust as a musician, I can tell you it 100% is. Almost all of them had some physical component of like physically getting up out of the space that they were in, going to another space, and doing something else that required some sort of physical activity. I thought that was really interesting, and like a lot of them said exactly the same kind of thing. Like it's when you step away, and we probably all had this experience on something when you're trying to figure out a problem or you're working on something and it's just a grind, it's not going anywhere. Once you like turn your focus and attention somewhere else, once you step away from it a little bit, like the answer sort of comes to you, that sort of thing. And it's like people describe it like a lightning bolt or like moment of clarity, moment of revelation. I guess the moment of clarity thing is an AA thing, but whatever works, whatever language you want to use, it's fine. And I think it's true, but also that happens. The stepping away from it and taking a minute, I think, also works, but also all the work that you did mentally to get to that point where you are ready to have that moment of revelation or whatever it is. Obviously, that matters, but also like you're usually when people say that they're doing that, they're usually doing something physical. And I really think it's that. It's not just like, oh, I stopped doing this thing and I started like I'm working on my computer and I start playing video games. I'm sure that happens. We live in a world of possibility. But more often than not, I think it usually happens when we get up and physically do something. And this sort of speaks to why that might be. I mean, this is looking at older adults and that sort of thing, but like I do think it sort of speaks to a larger benefit of doing this, and a benefit that I read about in a totally different context, which was the context of a Buddhist monk, and we'll get to that point. The other thing that I want to talk about was like the exterior stuff, and like this all comes from an article called "Walking and Writing: The Effects of Exercise on Creative Thinking," and it comes from an article. The article was published in The Artifice, written by Tara East, who is a creative writer with a couple master's degrees in writing and a certificate in editing and publishing and a master's in creative writing. So, and like, in thinking about this workshop, like one thing that would be easy to do is like, oh, just talk about famous writers that are known for walking. That's a thing. If you don't know, there are many, like Charles Dickens is probably like maybe the most well known for like going on these like epically long walks. Do people know the word flaneur? French word flaneur. I think it's FLANUER or EUR. I have no French. Hi, I am a monolingual American. Yay. It's embarrassing. Yeah, that's kind of okay. But it's like one who walks sort of just like without purpose, or like it's not about it's just going for walk to notice things, to see new terrain, just to walk basically, and seeing what arrives. There's like if you look up walking like and writers or like walking famous writers, you'll see all kinds of quotes and stuff like that, and that's fine. Um, that stuff is nice, but I don't know how like practically useful it is. I'm sort of more interested in like looking at information that can point to why doing this thing that we already do can have a lot of benefits. And so I was thinking about the exterior stuff, the stuff that focuses the mind on awareness and observation on that which is by definition not you, things outside of you. And if you're going through, like, I think a lot of times if we go on walks to like clear our head, or there are things going through difficult stuff, whatever it might be, like when I was talking to my students today, a lot of that is like interior. Like they talked about, like, I'm just kind of thinking through things in my head, and they're taking the problem sort of with themselves, which is understandable. That's what we do. Probably when you're doing your free write, there are probably competing things going on and things you could write about and different thoughts, right? And you kind of like pick the one that's like most readily available or the one that's most easily translated into language, something like that. I think, and that's great. And if that works for you, that's a great reason to do this sort of like walking practice, this walking meditative practice. My interest in it came from more like on that focusing outside of the attention. And part of that was I can kind of table, it helps calm the voices in here. And I don't mean like in a mental health way, like I'm medicated or something like that, but like whatever the nagging problem is, whatever the difficult thing is, whatever, just the issues that accumulate in your mind being in this world, living this life.
I think if the brain's corrected, I think they call it the monkey brain.
Yeah, monkey mind. That's exactly right. Yeah. That's how it was introduced to me in that meditations and poetics class. We all have monkey mind. There's a bunch of stuff going on. How do you quiet the monkey mind? How do you like focus that elsewhere? For me, the thing that has always been helpful is to focus on things that are by definition not me, things outside of me. So just observing the world. And I've got like a lot of those journals that I was talking about earlier are just filled with sort of like observations, notes, just trying to notice things, right? Because I feel like the more I notice of the world, the more I feel in it, the less I feel encumbered by all the stuff that's going on in here. And there's constantly stuff going on in here. That's why I write in the first place, is to try to work through some of that stuff, full disclosure. Um, so I'm going to read a couple excerpts from this article. They're in chronological order as they appear in here. Again, I will send along the links. Everybody can check these things out. I thought this was a really cool article, but this kind of speaks. The first one is more this kind of scientific brain stuff. This is a little bit more the sort of what we do when our brains are working, hopefully optimally, but at least like well and creatively and healthily. So to quote the article, when a daily walk can be, while a daily walk can be an effective way to take a break from a difficult manuscript or other difficult problems. This is a writer talking about writing, so I'll kind of edit as I go along. Other authors or people, authors are people too, use it intentionally to unloop thought, work out solutions, or with the hope that the muse will reveal some creative insight. As Daylight, who's another author quoted in the article, says, quote, maybe it's because you're distracted enough because you need to look around when you cross the road or whatever. You're distracted enough from yourself to let the creative play start to happen. And then your mind just goes. Here's the thing you're looking for, end quote. That thing. I think that's really like, I think that's real. And like, it's part distraction, but it's also like part physically moving through the world in some way. Daylight goes on to hypothesize that these moments of insight may be brought on by an increase in endorphins. When the body relaxes, the mind is allowed to open up to new possibilities. Okay. Next excerpt. Beyond spontaneous insight and the space for mental clarity, walking, especially outside, can be a useful way to gather inspiration and stimuli that can fuel the creative process. Author Sarah Schmidt often documents her daily walks by taking photos, posting them on her blog. The often eerie and unsettling images mirror the mood of her equally eerie and unsettling, though engrossing debut novel, See What I Have Done. The photographs complement the mood of Sarah's work, thus supporting her creative process, but the work also grants her the time to contemplate the novel on a deeper level. That capturing, like, to me, writing is not just you've got a pen and paper or you've got keys and you're on a computer. That's cool, but also like that sort of documenting. Like if you've got a phone with you and it's got that sort of capability, like if you've got voice recording, you can do field recordings, right? Like if you're somewhere and there's just like lots of bird calls or something, like that's something I found myself doing out west, was just being in spaces where like sound is alien. Just like it doesn't sound like this here because there's different flora, there's different fauna, there's like there's different kind of there's coastline, there's waves, that sort of thing. And so I've got a bunch of field recordings that I did, just walking around, just hit record on the voice recorder and just recording whatever comes. I took tons of pictures and hey, it's me next to this landmark, or hey, I'm doing this cool thing, or like here I am at the top of this mountain, aren't I awesome? I'm not a big selfie, but like most of the time when I take pictures, they are not fit for public consumption. I'm a terrible photographer. But for me, it's more of a way of quickly annotating a moment or a thing or an image so I can come back to it and do something with it, usually in language, right? So I feel like that idea of like capture is really important, and to me is a form of writing. Like if you take beautiful pictures and you want to put them in frames and do that, obviously there's probably a creative session that will be coming up related to that, and you should definitely check it out. Yeah, but like I just think about it like in an expanded way. Like for me, writing is any way that I can capture something in the world, whether that's with a pen or keys or voice recording, whatever it might be. Okay, little more science. Another excerpt. Ideal or not, walking does improve our ability to think more creatively. In a study conducted by Stanford University, which is linked in the article, which is nice. As someone who teaches comp, I'm big on like citing your sources and having those kind of things, which all of these do. Marilee Opezo and Daniel Schwartz found that creative ideation increased during and shortly after walking. In a meta moment, the idea for this experiment arose while Marilee and Daniel were out on a walk. The study featured 4 experiments that tested participants' creative divergent thinking by having them complete a couple tests. One is a test where you take a single object and try to think of as many uses for that object as possible. And the other one is compound remote associates. So one is taking a single object and trying to find a lot of different uses for it. The other one is sort of like imagining as many different scenarios as you can, given like a certain context. Again, both defined, both cited in the article. The study compared the effects of walking on a treadmill, sitting then walking, walking then sitting, walking outside, and being pushed in a wheelchair outside. Following a walk, 81% of the 176 students had an increased improvement on their on scores on both of their tests. Had an increased improvement on the one score and 23 up on the other score. So in both of these, what they're trying to do is measure kind of 2 different kinds of creativity. One where you've got limited circumstances and you're trying to find a way to use something a lot of different ways. Another one where you're trying to figure as many different scenarios out of this one sort of puzzle. So in both of these different kinds of creativity, they found results, positive results. And they said students, the data and who these students specifically were included in the source. I don't have that right in front of me. But last section from this. Writing could be described as a conglomeration of personal experiences, observation, external stimuli, consciously or subconsciously absorbed, and the occasional random insight. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, and I love that definition. These different sources of information settle in our brains, as Ann Patchens describes, like a mental compost. It's through the act of walking that the author is able to shake free the compacted knowledge and discover something useful. This can only occur, however, if the mind is unclamped or enters a non-thinking state. Fact about heart disease read weeks ago and promptly forgotten may reappear while trekking a deserted bush track. Suddenly, the writer is able to fix that drab scene with their overweight, overaged protagonists by transforming it into a medical drama. Now, that's writerly stuff. But the point that like personal experiences, observations, external stimuli, however they are absorbed, and the occasional random thought, I think we could probably throw a couple other things on that pile, but that's writing. Now, why write? All kinds of reasons. People, talk about being a little more organized, things like that. Just writing down your thoughts, a simple kind of basic writing practice, like keeping a journal. Has anyone ever kept a journal? Just like whatever, diary, journal, whatever you want to call it. I know the nomenclature changes. And I don't mean like as a writer, like I'm writing poems like you were talking about, like also that, but just like, this is what I did today. This is who I saw, those kind of things. A simple writing practice like that, or just like even sending emails or letters are cool. It's always cool to get letters in the mail, but even something as simple as like sending emails to people on a regular basis or having like a regular email correspondence has all kinds of, it helps with depression and anxiety. It helps your thoughts be more organized. It helps you have, clarity with those thoughts, right? And to help them sort of be a little more useful to you, I guess. So I'm like, if a simple writing practice can have those kind of benefits, and then a simple walking practice can have all of these benefits, if we put the two together, I'm interested in the things that can come out of that, that experiment. And I don't mean in terms of like you're going to write the great American novel or something like whatever it is that you write. I'm less interested in what you write, and I don't mean that I don't want to read what you write. I do. I'm interested in that. But if you want to write about your own life, if you want to write a story, if you want to write a poem, if you want to just like make a list of things that you're observing, whatever it is, doesn't really matter so much. Putting those two things together, I think, has all kinds of, then you're getting all of those benefits together. And really the way, like, I didn't think about these things in component pieces because they first came to me from Thich Nhat Hanh. Are people familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh? Very, very famous Buddhist monk. Has written many books. Still alive, but I think is like not speaking, is sort of like is awaiting transition. I think as his followers in Vietnam refer to it. But he wrote this book called one of the many books that he's written is Peace in Every Step. Let me get the full title. Peace in Every Step: The Path of Mindfulness in Everyday Life. And so I read this book in this class, and like this was the walking. This is on walking meditation. So walking meditation can be very enjoyable. We walk slowly, alone or with friends, if possible, in some beautiful place. I like that because so many of these almost seem to require a natural space. But what if you live in a space that does not have a lot of natural beauty? Like, what if you live in an urban environment? Is this not accessible to you? It is accessible to you. Take it from someone who did all of this in a very urban environment. So, we walk slowly, alone or with friends, and if possible, in some beautiful place. Walking meditation is really to enjoy the walking. Walking not in order to arrive, but walking just to walk. The purpose is to be in the present moment and aware of our breathing and our walking, to enjoy each step. Therefore, we have to shake off all worries and anxiety, not thinking of the future, not thinking of the past, just enjoying the present moment. We can take the hand of a child as we do it. We walk, we make steps as if we are the happiest person on earth. Although we walk all the time, our walking is usually more like running. When we walk like that, we print anxiety and sorrow on the earth. We have to walk in a way that we only print peace and serenity on the earth. We can all do this, provided that we want it very much. Any child can do it. If we take a step like this, we can take 2, 3, 4, or 5. When we're able to take one step peacefully and happily, we are working for the cause of peace and happiness for the whole of humankind. Walking meditation is a wonderful practice. When we do our walking meditation outside, we walk a little slower than our normal pace, and we coordinate our breathing with our steps. For example, we may take 3 steps with each in-breath and 3 steps with each out-breath. So we say in, out, out, out. In is to help us identify the in-breath. Every time we call something by its name, we make it more real, saying it like the name of a friend. If your lungs want 4 steps instead of 3, please give them 4 steps. I love that. If your lungs want, like if your breathing wants, I love that phrasing. That's really great. If it only wants 2 steps, give them 2. The lengths of your in-breath and out-breath do not have to be the same. For example, you can take 3 breaths with each inhalation, 4 with each exhalation. If you feel happy and peaceful and joyful while you're walking, you are practicing correctly. That, right? And it goes on, kind of talking about this difference between walking and running, as Thich Nhat Hanh would define it, the sort of like more destination concerned walking, right? So that was kind of how I came to all of this. I found this really cool list in the Guardian of like ways to like make your walk more meaningful, more useful, more relaxing, whatever. So I'll throw out a couple. We kind of talked about mindful walking. That was what Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about. Giving yourself a mission. Winter is surprisingly a good time to practice mindfulness outside. The fact that the world is partly dormant can prompt us to turn our attention inward. Things tend to come into sharper focus in the out of doors. So we're not quite to winter yet, thankfully, blissfully. But once you feel quiet inside from the breathing and exercise outlined earlier, and this is a real common prompt, Notice 5 things in nature you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things that you can feel, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. Although, do not lick the plants. Do not taste the plants. Very much not do that. Don't eat the plants in Oregon. They might have some weird ones out there. But that prompt, that like 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, like that's a really common prompt. If you're looking for some kind of prompt, maybe that's a good one to do. I actually did that for my free ride when we were outside. Because I was really taken with the different smells of different parts of the garden. How they seem to sort of like hold dominion over like big swatches of air. And that's pretty cool. It talks about using like smart apps. If you're someone who's a little more like tech savvy and things like that, both to like, like monitor where you're walking and change up routes and things like that, but also for that sort of, that information capture, that observation capture, that awareness capture, right? It makes that a lot easier, and then you can kind of go back and sit with those things later. Do people count steps? Are there step counters? Yeah, the step counters. Sometimes. I mean, like, there's all kinds of reasons to do like those things would not exist if they did not have a practical value, right? So I want to not tell you to do that, but maybe sometimes if you're someone who does that like in a very regimented, consistent way, sometimes maybe don't do that. See what happens. Like, don't have it like have the absence of a mission, right? Rather than something that you're going to look for or a number of steps that you're trying to hit or something like that. Like that is still an objective. It is a good objective and for all kinds of good reasons, but like sometimes just having that sort of objective can distract from like the other pleasures one might have while wandering around in any sort of given space.
What do you mean by step count?
Like counting steps, like the Fitbit.
Like the total number of steps that, I walked 10,042 steps.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Oh, okay, no.
Yeah. And it's like I said, those tools don't exist if they don't serve some practical purpose. So there's more. I will send them to you, but like I'm more interested in just kind of maybe walking around if we can, and then doing a little writing after that and seeing how it feels and what we're thinking about, whatever that is. appreciate y'all riding with me tonight. I appreciate Living Proof having me here to speak with y'all and write with y'all and experience this beautiful place together. And I hope it was somewhat useful. Like I said, I'll send those links so you can do more reading and not just have to listen to my grainy voice reading things at you, which I know is not the best. But like, there's a ton of reading to be done out there. If this is something that interests you, like I said, walking and writing, a simple Google search will you will see it blooms with information and ideas and things like that. So, huh?
No pun intended.
Definitely pun intended. Definitely pun intended. But thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I love doing these. I always love doing these creative sessions. So thank you all. I appreciate it.